Hey guys, how you doing? You probably saw the thumbnail, and I'm sure you're saying to yourself, Dave has gone nuts. He's gone around the bend. Totally lost it. Okay, well, here's what I'm not gonna do. I didn't put that up there so then I could now reverse course and say, oh, it's the old bait and switch. Guess I tricked you. No, we'll get there. I'll stand by that. But, my friends, context. I am not, there's nothing I'm saying here because I'm trying to change your mind. It's a fool's errand. I'm not interested in changing your mind. You got to think whatever you think. Thinking that you're going to be successful at that is kind of crazy. I'm not going to change anybody's mind. And I think wanting to just leads to frustration because it's not going to happen. So I'm not trying to, you think whatever you think, you like whatever you like, okay? Let me give you a couple things, though, about some context so you can understand where I'm coming from with all this. And we'll get to it. I promise you, we'll get to it. Bit of context. When I was 14, Carl Sagan's famous PBS series Cosmos came out, and it was incredibly important to me. Meant a lot to me, and I learned a lot from it. And one of the things about it that was so incredible was Sagan himself. I wouldn't say it's cult of personality stuff, but see, the thing about Sagan was he was the preeminent explainer of science at his time. For instance, Neil deGrasse Tyson, you might like Tyson and find Tyson a fascinating guy who can explain tough ideas in a way that most people can understand it. That's a gift. It's marvelous. Well, Neil deGrasse Tyson was a student of Carl Sagan at Cornell. In fact, he went to Cornell so he could study with Sagan because he liked Sagan so much. He did a Cosmos series, which was a tip of the hat and a homage to his old teacher. But who was Sagan? What was Sagan all about? Sagan, like I say, was like Tyson, the preeminent explainer. But he was so much more than that because he wasn't just a guy who could talk science. He was a working scientist. He worked on the Voyager probes, which you may hear every now and again. The Voyager probes have gone beyond the solar system. They were launched in the 70s, and they still, for the most part, work. And they're out there still making measurements and so forth. An amazing thing, really. And they originally were a planetary survey craft, but they're still out there. And Sagan was very much involved with that project, Jet Propulsion Laboratory and all of that. He was involved with the Viking landers, which were the first the first landings on Mars, the first photos from Mars. So he was a working scientist involved. Our ideas of nuclear winter. Sagan was one of the guys involved in that, putting the theory together. Going back to the Voyager craft have on the side of them a gold record full of, which he was very involved in that, with instructions. If someone were to find it, that they could get all of the information off, which included not just music, included music, Gregorian chants, didgeridoo music, Bach, Beethoven, jazz, Chuck Berry. I mean, it was included greetings of humans in virtually every language on the planet saying hello and welcome. Greetings from the planet Earth. Photos, tons of information, where we were, what we looked like, animals. Message in a bottle, they threw it out there. He was very involved in that. Sagan was a fascinating man. He not only was this great explainer of science, extraordinary knowledge of history, literature, obviously mathematics, history of science. He was a polymath. He knew vast amounts about all sorts of things. Great knowledge of the arts. Truly amazing person. What used to be referred to as a Renaissance man. He was an inspiration, I think, for a lot of people to say, look what is possible. and what we should be striving for. We should want to have this kind of knowledge of food, knowledge. We should want to know it all. We're never going to, damn, we should be trying. Okay? I think that's a big deal. The next one is, that led me to another guy. It led me to a guy named James Burke. James Burke was, for many years, the BBC reporter on spaceflight. Whenever NASA was doing stuff, James Burke was the BBC's guy, explaining to that part of the world what was going on. Another guy was a marvelous explainer. And later on, I believe Burke is still with us. He might be 90 years old at this point. It's amazing. Burke, I believe, is still with us. But Burke did a series of programs, one called Connections, about various things that had happened in the history of science and how they connected to the world we had now in ways maybe you had never thought of. Great show. And he did I believe, a couple sequel series of that. But there was another program he did called The Day the Universe Changed. And that might be my all-time favorite. He had an incredible thesis that he put forth at the beginning. But before I get to that, at the beginning of the show, they showed the sunrise, which was a part of the first scene in the entire series. But he shows the sunrise, and I believe there's a glass sphere that's held in front of the sun so that everything goes upside down. That's a nice metaphor. It says the day the universe changed, and it fades out. And then there's a moment that something comes up on the screen, and it says, A Personal View by James Burke. And we head into the show. That moment, a personal view, makes my day, makes my life. That's all any of us, hopefully, are saying. And Burke had the presence of mind to say that and make sure that that got a moment on the screen. Not trying to convince you of anything. Think whatever you want. That's all this is. This is a personal view. This is how I see it. I don't think I have a monopoly on the truth. I'm not saying you should think what I think. Think whatever the hell you want. But I'm allowed to have a personal view. That's where all this is coming from today. That's where all my stuff is coming from. I'm trying to change your mind. Personal view. At the beginning of that program, there was the dawn, and he said, here it is, something that people have seen forever. And there's a story that goes that the eminent philosopher Wittgenstein was at some event, and people said to him how dumb and how stupid people in the Middle Ages and so forth must have been to see the dawn and be convinced that it was the sun going around the earth when we know that the opposite is true. How dumb they were. And apparently Wittgenstein listened to that and said, yeah, but I wonder what it would have looked like if the sun was going around the earth. And the point is, of course, it would have looked exactly the same, right? So those people were just responding to the information they had at the time. Okay? At the time. Time is the key thing here. And he used that to say his theory, his view was that we are what we know. And that whenever the body of knowledge changes, so do we. I think of it almost as being a balloon that's slowly getting inflated. Sometimes it could go the other way. The fall of Roman Empire, we lost a lot of information. Oh, but we got it back again. Okay. But for the individual, if you become aware of something and the bell rings, you can't unring the bell. Why? Because there's still the all-time undefeated, never lost a game factor, force of nature. The arrow of time. The arrow of time never loses. Time continues. Once something happens for you, it happened. You may try to forget about it. It still happened. And anyone with integrity, they have to sit there and say, yeah. You can't unknow what you know. You shouldn't even want to. So all of that is what informs my discussion of the arts. In this particular case, we're going to talk about jazz, but not just jazz. We could use it when we talk about what we loosely refer to as classical music, the Western through composed tradition, pardon me. True with pop music, true with virtually any form of music. So if I'm going to make a complaint about jazz, I'm really going to be making a complaint about a lot of things. But I'm going to start with jazz. I love jazz and discovered it as a kid. And as the years have gone by, I have found that there's been a tendency to want to go, almost want to go backwards or freeze it in place. Winton's movement had a lot to do with that. Freeze it in place. We're just not going to go beyond a period of time in history. We're not going to deal with that. Kind of impossible, and there's been numerous times where that part of the world has had to make allowances. But there is a sense of, the minute you try to take an art form and say, okay, we're going to freeze it, it's going to stay like this now forever, it's dead. It just died. It's when what was an art, a living art, and by a living art I mean what Duke Ellington said. It was on the streets. It was happening to people. It had relevance. It's the difference between it being that, a continuing movement, and now being something that looks back upon itself, recreates what happened before, plays for each other, essentially, and it just isn't part of the culture anymore. In that living, breathing sense, it's given up on that. And I see that. That's almost exactly what has become of jazz. Now, what's crazy about this, there's a lot of stuff to get into about it, but one of the things that's so crazy about it is there are things that are totally going in opposite directions. You can make an argument that jazz has never been played so well, ever. That the people playing it have never played so well. And yet, this is what's going to get people all messed up. It's also true that it also may be less effective artistically, that it has less impact. Well, how could that be, right? It's being played better than it ever was played before. I'll give you a couple examples. There was I saw a tenor sax player not too long ago. Extraordinary player, all right? Killing it. Extraordinary playing, okay? Live, killing it. I think they were playing like Wayne Shorter tunes from the 60s. It might have been Witch Hunt or something. I mean, just amazing performance. And I didn't care. Well, what's wrong with you, Dave? I don't think there's something wrong with me. The problem is Wayne already did it 60 years ago. Arrow of Time, ring the bell. If someone painted like Monet, like perfectly, right? it wouldn't get seen in an art museum. It already happened. Monet did it, over 100 years ago. It's already been done. No one's doing Impressionism. That movement, which I love, but that movement had its place in a period of time. And the world moved on and it stopped. The arrow of time. There's a trumpet player I know, and I'm a trumpet player. I love trumpet players. Trumpet player, I don't know this person personally, but there's a trumpet player, number of them. Particular player, young player, extraordinary, bebopper, plays the language like perfectly. I will never want to own a record by this person. I want the stuff when it happened. I would rather listen to Miles imperfectly play things when it was happening than somebody doing an impression of it now. Here's another reason it doesn't land as well. They were playing in response to a world they were living in. If you're playing that music, you can't go back to the 1960s and 1950s, live there, experience it long enough so that it informs your playing. You're doing an impression. And an impression, no matter how good, is still that. The Impressionists, when the Impressionists happened, they weren't trying to paint like people 60, 80 years before them. They were creating a new thing, right? So there is a need. If you can't do that, what are you doing other than showing how well you can enunciate a thing? You're not really saying anything. And look, I feel so bad for jazz musicians because I think they've been screwed over so badly. But that music has changed and changed and changed. That's part of its history. So you can make an argument, well, there's been growth because the nomenclature about even how you play it has changed over the years. It changed from the older players who I knew. I remember bumping into players from the 60s and so forth, and they didn't understand the language we were using in the 80s. And I didn't think that made them wrong. It meant that now that music had become an academic thing, and the academic world had taken control of it. I'm not sure that was good. I don't think that's good necessarily for any art form, because now it becomes a thing that has to be subservient to an academic view on things. I don't think that's good for artistic movements. So I'm not sure we've been helpful. You go, but wait a minute, you love college. Who's not for more knowledge? Well, I'm all for more knowledge. But it could change it. The only place where jazz survives to a large degree is in schools and at the academy. I mean, there's still some out there, but it's so small. It's such a small scene. And many of the people I knew realized that we were just going around in circles. One of my favorite, my college roommate, great tenor sax player. He's a great player and a great guy. And I learned a lot from him. He's someone I think the world of. And in the 90s, he decided to stop playing his instrument. He went and played soprano and started doing avant-garde work because he was looking, I think, for, okay, I have to find a direction. Not to make money, in order to live and breathe every day, I need to find what's new and what's now and how I'm going to say things. And even though the avant-garde, it was as far as he could think of to what does now sound like? And that's an even bigger question. I think improvisation has a place. I think the current people who do a lot of it is very, very, there is some interesting work being done. But I'm not sure I see people always looking backward. I don't see anybody saying, I want musically structurally in some way to alter it. What does now sound like? We're in the second, third decade of, the 21st century. Why are we playing like the 1960s and 1950s? They weren't doing that in the 1920s and trying to sound like the 1860s. I mean, what does now sound like? There's all sorts of things going on in the world. There's going to be a sound that reflects that. Isn't that our job? So, I'm not sure jazz is, for people who've never discovered before and are discovering, okay, that's great. If they see some of that stuff live, they will be amazed and go, I didn't know people could do this. Great. It's great. That's great. It's fine. But is it doing anything? It's perfecting what's already been. It's not doing anything new. Look, you think, oh, you just hate jazz, or no, not at all. I love jazz, but I recognize that time is passing. What are we, and some of this is for me. I ask myself, what is it that I must do? And it's not play some music to make a certain scene happy, to get the approval of a certain scene that I ticked off all the boxes and maybe I get a degree or something. That's not why we play music. What are we going to say about our current circumstances? There's a lot to be spoken about. There's a lot to be reacted to artistically. Why aren't we doing that? Well, we can't make $1 doing that. I get how screwed the scene is, but there's got to be some artistic integrity. What is it that you want to make? Not that what you want to sell, not that you want to turn into a product. What do you want to say in a cultural context? I see it in classical music to a large degree. There's nothing going on. There's nothing that I see that's new, really pushing. I'd like to see something pushing, but I don't see it. Even pop music. Now I'm going to get myself in trouble. But I had a discussion recently. Guy I know who I have a lot of respect for. You know what you're going to hear soon? There's a cat over here, and he's starting to snore. So if you hear cat snoring sounds, that's my guy Sundance. He's 13, 14. He loves to crash out. He's going to snore. I was talking to a friend of mine, a guy I know. I won't say a friend of mine. He's a guy I know. But I have a lot of respect for. A really, real bright guy, jazz guy, bass player, plays more popular stuff too. He plays all sorts of things. But he was talking about, he was very into singing the praises of Taylor Swift, for instance. And I said, okay, what is it about her that you like so much? And he goes, well, I'm a big sucker for songwriting. I said, okay. I'm not. So I said to him, yeah, I'm not. And he goes, right, there's a fundamental thing. And that's totally fine, and I know where he's at. And I'm not crazy about songwriting and never have been, because I do think it is a more dumbed down form so that you can get more people can hear it and understand it. Like the newspapers are written at a 6th grade level, so more people can understand it and hopefully get the information taken. That's all. That's okay. That's okay. But this is not the most sophisticated thing that you can do. Now, can you still do art with less? Oh, absolutely. And I'm a big believer in that too. Is there such a thing as good songwriting? Absolutely there is. And there's plenty that I love. I love old Nick Drake records. I will listen to Pink Moon and Five Leaves Left forever and think you're still hearing something as good as it ever came. But I never liked Elton John, which I thought was derivative and crap. And most of it I'm not a big fan of. And I asked him, what is it about Swift that you like? And you go, well, she's a storyteller, see? And I said, whoa, time out. Because that's a catchphrase I hear way too often. She's a storyteller? I don't remember ever taking a class in music school in storytelling. No, because we're not about narrative. We're not writers. We're not fiction writers. But the lyrics, yeah, I understand. But again, this is a personal view. In my world, I've never been that crazy about lyric writing is fine, but I don't take it terribly seriously. I get there's great craft, okay, in lyric writing. There's great craft in writing hit songs, okay? So they can do that, and Swift's people do that, and she's a very bright lady. Okay, and yeah, she comes off, I think, sometimes a little angry about everything, and you can like or dislike the vibe, but I don't think, her popularity, I don't think is necessarily built that much. I think it's almost a cult of personality, and I think that's true with a lot of the pop stars. I don't think there's anything going on though in the songs themselves, structurally, etc., that we haven't heard done before. They're executed extremely well. Okay? And again, I don't hate Taylor Swift. I could care less. All right? I don't resent Taylor Swift. Oh, you hate her, she's a woman. No, good God, no. It's really neither here nor there. And I think she's inspired a lot of people to the degree that she's done that. That's great, because she's taken some positions and things. And I've gone, yeah, good for her. All right, good for her. So yeah, I don't think she's some terrible person or anything like that. But the level of adulation might be a little out of proportion. Yeah, that's true. But I think that's true of most of these people who really, really blow up. None of them can be this thing. I ever thought Tom Hanks deserved, America's Dad or something. I mean, Paul, he's a good actor, but he's frequently been the same. But this is what happens when something really, really blows up. Okay. Well, he's a terrible guy. I don't hate Tom Hanks, but I don't think he's the greatest thing that ever happened to acting. No. He's a reliably good actor who's picked a lot of roles that work for him. And once the gates open for you, all these guys get it all. That's great. I'm watching it happen right now to Zendaya, who is seems like a really nice kid, but she's now going to be the greatest actress who ever lived. I mean, okay. I remember, it's an old bit, but someone saying, some movie where they were making fun of Hollywood, and the Sixth Sense, I think it just came out, and someone said, "Oh yes, Haley Joel Osment is going to the Oscars to pick up their Lifetime Achievement Award." This is a spectacular line, but it was just showing, we do these sort of things. But I don't see necessarily anything going on in pop songwriting that wasn't done by, say, Elton John or all sorts of folks. I don't see something really, again, musically. I don't care about how you're presented. I don't care about words. I don't care about what clothes you wore. Okay? Talking about musical stuff. And I get that in the pop world, music really isn't that big a deal. That isn't really, I mean, when you go to see these performances, they're only they're shows. Right? It's about the clothes, and it's about the lights, and it's about everything. It's not, these aren't, it's a theatrical experience. Again, all that's fine if you want to dig it. But if I would be perfectly fine going into a room and having the room get dark and nothing else happening and just closing my eyes and listening, because I want a musical experience. And I don't need all that other stuff. So, yeah, that's where I'm at with a lot of this. These forms, I think, need to change fundamentally, or I think they just will have to. I think they really are coming to an end. And I'm not sure the person out playing jazz and they've got it down and they're playing bop like perfectly. I don't think they're helping jazz. I think they're helping it to come to a stop that I think it's already come to. They're just making it, if it's dead, they're making it more dead. And if that's what we're doing, I don't think that's what we should be doing. I think those young players who've got so much going for them should be trying to find something new. This is interesting. When Wynton's stuff happened, it was a reaction to a lot of fusion. Okay? And some of that fusion had become just pop music, and there was a lot, okay. But there was also, looking back at it, a lot of the fusion that was going on in the 70s, if we're talking about Weather Report, or we're talking about, there were people doing interesting stuff. They were trying to take it to, hell, Miles had stopped playing jazz. Miles in the 60s recognized, that time's done. We need to move on. And there was a crowd that was like, oh, we'll never move on. So I went down that rabbit hole too. And looking back at it, I'm not saying I made this tremendous mistake, but that movement, if it was a springboard to do something else, maybe they were onto something. But I don't think it ever has been. It's become a museum piece, and it wants to be one. I don't think that's affecting the culture, because it's removing yourself from the culture. It's renouncing the arrow of time. I'm going to make believe that a number of bells never rang. I'm staying in my intellectually, philosophically, it can't work. It doesn't hold water. What is next? I'm trying to find it, at least for myself, which is all anybody I think can do. For me, I see things that are more minimal. I see somewhere where some things going on in electronic music, but also a lot of things that would be happening in minimal classical music sort of come together. I think there are elements of jazz that could be part of that. I think there's a sound to be found that sounds like now. This culture, which means you have to have an impression of what this culture is, because there's AI in the world, and there's misinformation and disinformation, and things are confused. There needs to be some music that reflects this. And it's our society's a mess. So I think we're going to need some music that reflects either that or a reaction to that. Maybe a way of backing off a little bit and saying, okay, the world is crazy, but there's an oasis over here, and I'm going to stay in the oasis where it's safe. Musics that reflect these sorts of ideas, instead of just jumping into the whirlpool and letting it spin you around. So, it might be that some of these forms, they're really not doing us a hell of a lot of good. And I think the job of the musician is to find the next thing. The job of the artist is to find the next thing. For those guys who are just playing parts because that's all they really want to do is prove to the next guy that, look, I could play this particular line of this thing cleaner than you can. And there's a ton of that. There's really not a conversation to be had with them. I have no interest. I probably have never played better than I'm playing right now. And I have no interest whatsoever in getting into some kind of playing competition with people and what they think playing is supposed to do. Perfect playing, and we're going to all have a contest that will get adjudicated. No interest in. I think we should have grown out of that stuff a long time ago. What are we, at my stage in life, finally, what is it that we've got to say about the world that we're living in? So, these forms are hanging on by a thread, I guess. But in essence, they're dead. No one's doing drip paintings. No one's doing. We're not going back in time and doing, impressionism again. All those things were great, but they're connected to their time. And the great jazz of Sonny Rollins and Miles Davis and Coltrane and Monk, although they could still speak to us over time, just like Beethoven can, just like Impressionism can. They are connected to their time. The arrow of time still wins. The bell has been rung. It cannot be unrung. There are bells ringing now. What are we going to do about now? What are we going to say about now? That's my personal view.